The call came not with protocol or warning, but with the sudden weight of history shifting its course. Deep in the secured chambers of the presidential residence in Ouagadougou, as the winds of post-coup instability howled just beyond the high walls, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood alone until a Russian accent, calm and commanding, broke the silence. "Ibrahim, this is Vladimir Putin. I do not call often, but today I call you." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The weight of sanctions, betrayals, sabotage, and drone surveillance vanished into the background. Here was the voice of a man who'd outlived empires and rewritten the maps of Europe with icy precision. Traoré, hardened by battles in the Sahel and assassins within his own walls, felt something he hadn't in months: recognition. "You remind me," Putin continued, "of what we once were, unbending, disobedient to decay. I have watched your steps, your decisions, your war against the hands that strangle Africa in silence. And I believe it's time you know you are not alone anymore." There was no speech prepared, no translator needed. Just two soldiers, born of different continents, recognizing in each other the same war, the war to survive without permission. "Russia," Putin said slowly, "will not let you fall. Not now. Not while you stand with dignity. Not while the vultures circle and call it democracy." Traoré, unmoved on the surface, clenched the handset tighter. Outside, a security siren flared for a second before being silenced. The world was still hunting him, and yet, in that moment, something shifted. A chessboard beyond the borders of Burkina Faso began to realign. "What are you offering?" Traoré asked, voice firm but curious. Putin's tone didn't waver. "Fuel, arms, satellites, but more importantly, sovereignty. You will not bow. We will ensure it." It wasn't just aid, it was alliance. A whispered pact sealed not on paper but in blood, in memory, in the silence of two men who had nothing to prove to journalists or diplomats. "Why me?" Traoré asked. "Because," Putin replied, "when the empire burns, it is not the generals who rise. It is the captain who refused to kneel. And Africa is watching. Soon they'll follow. And you, Ibrahim, you will be the signal fire." The line went quiet for 3 seconds before disconnecting. No signature, no ceremony. Just a call, destined to redraw the fault lines of the continent. From that moment forward, Burkina Faso would not be seen the same way. Not by the West, not by Africa, and certainly not by those who had once underestimated a young captain with fire in his eyes and a lion-hearted child by his side. News of the call did not break through official channels. It was never confirmed by any government spokesperson, nor was it captured by the international press. But in Ouagadougou, something changed almost immediately. Within hours, Russian cargo planes, painted in plain gray, unmarked by flag or crest, were reported circling discreetly above the outskirts of the capital before landing at a remote military airstrip once controlled by French forces. The shipments were swift and silent. Crates marked only with serial codes, embedded communication devices with anti-surveillance encryptions, and schematics for infrastructure, bridges, railroads, and energy grids that hadn't existed outside of old dreams. But more powerful than the supplies was the ripple in global diplomacy. European embassies, once smug in their sanctions and soft invasions masked as humanitarian aid, began to request quiet meetings. The African Union, previously cautious around Traoré's sudden rise, now sent a delegation with no conditions, only questions. And in the streets of the capital, people walked with straighter backs, whispering not of fear, but of prophecy. "The boy who saved his father," they said, "has awakened something greater than a country." Inside the presidential compound, Traoré held his son close. Abdul, still a child but already carrying the weight of stories older than his age, looked up with those same unwavering eyes. "Was that the man you told me about, the one who made the snow countries tremble?" Ibrahim nodded slowly. "He sees us now. The world sees us." But it was never about just being seen. The call had not just offered protection, it had cracked open the illusion that Burkina Faso was small, that it was a pawn. Now, whispers emerged from Mali, Niger, and even Congo. Other leaders, some in hiding, others too cautious to speak, began sending messages through encrypted lines. "What did he say to you?" they asked. "How did you make him see you?" Traoré didn't answer, not yet. Because what Putin offered was not just alliance, but an unspoken dare. Will you rise or will you survive? And Traoré, born of fire and betrayal, chose to rise. In the coming weeks, something extraordinary happened. An international summit, unofficial, unsanctioned, was hosted on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, where former enemies sat across the same table under flickering lights and spoke not of trade quotas or colonial memories, but of a future they would forge without permission. Flags that once flew under different banners now hung beside Burkina Faso's own, and the slogan whispered by the people became a roar. Iron never kneels. And still, Abdul watched, listened, memorized. Because he understood more clearly than anyone that the call from Putin wasn't the end of a struggle. It was the beginning of a legend, one that he too would one day carry forward. The days that followed were not quiet. In fact, they were anything but. Intelligence satellites from Western powers shifted their gaze toward West Africa, confused by the silence on official frequencies and the sudden bursts of encrypted chatter between isolated African command centers. They didn't know the full content of the conversation between President Vladimir Putin and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, but they knew it had happened, and that was enough to cause fear. Fear in the boardrooms of multinational companies that once drained Africa's mines without resistance. Fear in the halls of foreign ministries where Africa had always been a bargaining chip, never an equal. And now, a new term began appearing in diplomatic reports. The Traoré alignment. It was vague, it was unconfirmed, but it was powerful. Inside Burkina Faso, the reality was more tangible. Russian engineers began working side by side with local teams on dam construction, urban security grids, and digital infrastructure that hadn't existed outside of blueprints. Agricultural experts from Belarus arrived in secret to help restore the degraded farmlands of the Sahel. In exchange, nothing immediate. No blood diamond contracts, no land leasing deals for a century. Just one condition. Your sovereignty remains yours. But for Ibrahim Traoré, the alliance was not about East versus West. It was about proving that small nations could no longer be overlooked. That Africa's children, especially its youngest, like Abdul, deserved a continent not carved up by invisible hands, but shaped by their own. Abdul watched all of this from the corridors of the palace. His days were now split between school lessons and quiet strategy sessions with his father. He wasn't being trained to fight anymore. Now he was being trained to lead. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he asked a question that silenced even his father. "Papa, when they come again, but this time with papers instead of guns, how do we stop them?" Traoré looked at him, truly looked, and said quietly, "Then we don't shoot. We sign the right future before they can write the wrong one." That evening, the president gathered his advisors. Maps were spread out. Not of battlefields, but of fiber optic routes, education corridors, and trade railways that connected not just villages, but visions. The boy who had once saved his father from a bullet was now saving his country from dependency. And far away in Moscow, Putin received a handwritten note, delivered not through diplomats, but through one of Traoré's trusted officers. On it, only 6 words written in the tidy, precise handwriting of a child. "Thank you. We won't forget. Abdul." It was not a warning. It was a promise. Years passed, the smoke of old wars faded into the soil, and the roar of gunfire was slowly replaced by the sound of construction, of children's laughter echoing through rebuilt schools, of crops growing on land that once knew only drought and blood. And through all of it, a boy named Abdul Traoré grew, not just in age, but in presence. By the time he was 12, world leaders whispered about him in quiet meetings. "That boy," they said, "the one from the ceiling." He became a symbol not just of courage, but of the future Africa demanded for itself. Fluent in 5 languages, versed in military tactics, diplomacy, and philosophy, Abdul was not molded by privilege but by purpose, and above all, by love, his father's love, his people's hope. He began visiting regions most leaders never set foot in. Conflict zones, forgotten villages, flood-damaged towns. Wherever he went, people stood straighter, spoke louder, believed more, not because he promised miracles, but because he listened. In one village plagued by bandit raids, an old man wept as Abdul sat beside him, holding his hand in silence for 15 minutes before saying a single word. "We're not leaving you behind." When Abdul turned 16, he stood on the same platform where his father had once been nearly executed, this time to deliver his first address to the nation. Not as a president, not yet, but as something more dangerous, an heir the people had chosen with their hearts long before any official title. "My name is Abdul," he began, voice steady like his father's. "You know my story, but today is not about the past. It's about proving that a child of Africa does not have to pick up a gun to be powerful. We can wield truth, unity, and pride, and we will." That speech was broadcast across the continent. In Kenya, young farmers replayed it on dusty cell phones. In Algeria, professors referenced it in political science courses. In South Africa, a girl named Nomsa cut out his photograph and taped it above her desk with a note. "If he can protect a nation, I can protect my dream." Back in Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré, now gray-haired but sharper than ever, watched from a quiet room, pride glowing in his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. He had already passed the torch, not through decree, but through devotion. And so the world would soon learn that in a time once ruled by old men and old empires, the future had arrived in the form of a boy who once whispered through an earpiece, fired a single shot from the ceiling, and changed the fate of a nation. And now he wasn't just the son of a legend, he was the beginning of one.